Good morning, everybody. How are we feeling? Jazzed up to be at VulnCon and talk all the things? Amazing. Well, I'm Rina Rakipi, and this is Tomo Ito. Thank you for your guys' understanding as we kind of actually amended the topic today. It'll still be similar to what we would have covered in the tabletop exercise, but the focus really here is going to be a conversation with you all. It'll be an open discussion, talking all things, all challenges with CVD, CNA, becoming a CNA, being a CNA, and with just being consumers of CVE. So we appreciate you guys being here today, and you guys are going to be willing participants in this conversation. It's such a unique opportunity to convene you all here today and have these types of conversations. So we're glad that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and allow Tomo to introduce himself, and then I'll introduce myself more in depth, and then we'll kick off a conversation. Tomo?
Thank you so much, Rina. I'm Tomo Ito from JPCERT Coordination Center. JPCERT CC, and we are CVD coordinator, and that's why I've been, speaking about like this kind of stuff. And my focus is on CVD, CVE, SBOM, things like that, everything CVD related. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. And Rina, please.
So my name is Rina Rakipi. I work for CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I lead our strategic partnerships and vulnerability program development. So I kind of cover a wide range of things. And what made me interested in these topics, I actually came from the writing side of the house at CISA. I was charged with writing a lot of our joint cyber advisories, and I ended up publishing a series of publications entitled the Secure by Design Alerts, and they focused on eliminating classes of vulnerability. So I'm very passionate about that topic, and that kind of brought me over to the vulnerability management side of the house, where I help support our efforts in recruiting CNAs and upskilling CNAs. I focus on helping to make improvements with the CVE program, and then also involved with Tomo in our Global CVD community of practice, where we're trying to gain common ground on challenges with CVD and what are the best ways to do CVD. So that's a little bit about why we're here, who we are, why we care. And so I'd like to actually start with asking the audience a few questions. Who in here does or has done coordinated vulnerability disclosure? Raise your hand. That's nearly everyone. Okay, let's see length. Who here thinks they've done CVD for the longest? I'm looking at Pete. 2001, so we've got around 24 years. Anyone at the 20-year mark? Anyone else at the 20-year mark? We got someone in the back? 1989, so he's got Pete and Omar beat. Okay. You're a young guy, perfect. All right, do we have anybody that's done CVD for 15 years? 10? Okay, we've got you over there. Dave over here, around 10 years. Okay, anyone 5 years? All right, we've got Maggie up front. 5 years? Sweet. Anyone less than 5 years? Julia? Less than 5 years. What's your name, sir? Caleb? Awesome. Are you doing CVD as a part of an organization, as a part of a government? Student. Awesome. We're so glad that you're here. Okay, next question. We're just trying to understand who we've got here in the audience. Anyone here a CVE numbering authority? A lot of you guys. Wow, we've got a great crew here. Okay, a lot of CVE numbering authorities. Anyone not a CVE numbering authority that's interested in becoming a CVE numbering authority? I agree with Julia. So Julia Turkovich over there is our lead CNA recruiter at CISA. She's the great person to talk to. And I think through this discussion today, we'll kind of uncover any challenges entities might have if they're not yet a CNA but are interested in becoming a CNA. Okay. And then who here uses CVE data? That should nearly be everybody. Okay. Amazing. Who loves using CVE data? And then lastly, who here is excited to have an open discussion about challenges with CVD, CNA, and using CVE data? I'm raising both of my hands. Perfect. Okay. I think we're going to kick it off with a bit of a problem statement. So as I mentioned, Tomo and I are a part of our global community of practice on coordinated vulnerability disclosure. And if you heard him and Justin Murphy talking about that yesterday, it's really meant to convene a bunch of international partners who do coordinated vulnerability disclosure and just gain some common ground, like, hey, what challenges are we facing? How can we support one another? So Tomo is going to dive into some of the problems that we've uncovered through that community of practice, along with the problem statement. And then we're going to just start asking some questions and opening the floor to discussion. Tomo?
Thank you. So the problem that I would like to bring up is that we also, as Rina said, CISA and a person from CISA and myself have been leading this community of practice of CVD, and there are different members participating from different parts of the world. And we have been introducing ourselves at the meeting, and we're talking about CVD. But one thing I've realized is that when we are speaking about like CVD, different members have different image or focus area or focus phase of CVD. So that actually CVD for different members are different. So that's a big problem that I see, because in CVD, one of the most important things is that information is reached to the people who need to know, and the information must be quality information. And and since we have a different image of CVD, and we are actually speaking about different things, different image of CVD creates this different layers in CVD and separation. So that part needs to be harmonized. Is the challenge that I found through the activity of CVD COP. So I'm trying to solve that, and I'm trying to find a reason for that. And it could be cultural differences, maybe language barriers, maybe because of the mission of your organization that you have that creates those differences. So yeah, and I would like to hear your experiences regarding CVD, what problems you had, what problems you have faced. So if you could speak up, that would be very appreciated. And the first question I would like to ask is does anyone have experience of, CVD case failing because of communication went wrong with the stakeholders, or you had different image of CVD with the stakeholders, that things went wrong and the information could not be disclosed, things like that? Like, has anyone experienced that, like, in CVD? And if you have, please share it.
There we go. You're not.
Now it's on. So different perspective than most of you CNAs. I work at Verizon, so we are not that. And ours is the other way around, right? We have products. We are obviously a very large telecommunication network, and people report vulnerabilities to us. It's one of the multiple ways we find vulnerabilities. I run the proactive security team, so exposure and vulnerability management, pen test, red team, AI red team, all that fun stuff. And we don't participate in any public bug bounty either. So when someone finds something, what actually just happened about a week or two ago, they Google, how to report a vulnerability, and that gets routed to us. We obviously look, make sure it's not an incident, make sure it's actually a researcher. We do all the threat intel on that person, et cetera. If they absolutely want to get paid, we have a process for that, but it's very ad hoc. But that's really the bigger issue we had was before we had a process to pay someone, a researcher would say, hey, we found something, and Verizon being Verizon, sometimes like Verizon.net, people think that's Verizon, that's actually our customers. They won't give us details, right? So then we had to build this process with a third party that hey, if you want to get paid, then you got to sign up with this third party. You got to fill out information. We need to know who you actually are, because if you want to get paid, we can't just like, Bitcoin you, right? We don't want an Uber problem that occurred there a few years ago. So I think that was the biggest challenge, was figuring out how to pay someone when they absolutely want it, right? Because when we talk coordinated vulnerability disclosure, obviously it's nice to not have to pay them, but they also did work. So, no free bugs. So that was our challenge, our most recent challenge.
No, that's a great point, and I think it brings up another great question from the private organization perspective. Has anyone built a bug bounty program in this room, or do people prefer to use a third party? Omar? We might have to pass around the mic.
Probably a little bit better. Yeah, we have multiple bug bounty programs. We grow through acquisitions. Cisco has inherited some bug bounty programs, have created bug bounty programs, and you probably can throw a share to me because I was the one that created the bug bounty policy at Cisco that they hated because we needed to harmonize a lot of things. It was all over the place. So Jorge, basically what you were mentioning about random reports that they don't know how to report vulnerabilities. Hopefully, we need to address that by incorporating standards already in assist, like security.txt, or through DNS. Like if people actually know where to report the vulnerabilities, and we have the vulnerability policy, exposed to that. Now, a lot of the bug bounty platforms and a lot of the more mature security researching firms, they actually already know that, and they're using that information to actually find out, hey, this is the way that you contact a PSER team or the vendor, etc. So if you're not familiar with the security.txt, or even you can do this with DNS records, I will definitely encourage you. But going back to the bug bounties, yeah, I can go on for hours. From private, public, even some nomenclatures called clear, where some bug bounty programs actually even do background checks onto the people that actually are supporting those. We have seen them all, right? Are they successful all the time? No. Do they have challenges that can be addressed? Yes. Do we also use VDP that we don't give money? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, most of the reports that we get to Cisco, not as a vendor, but the enterprise, like Cisco.com, etc., we actually route all that through a VDP program that is external to the company. Yeah, that's the way to scale a little bit. Yeah.
Anyone in the audience have any thoughts on what Omar said? Sarah?
Just go back to.
I might walk around and pass around the mic, actually.
So just going back to George's initial thing and what Omar added to it, from a CNA perspective, I mean, it's 2025. Our bug bounties assumed, because quite frankly, everywhere else it seems bug bounties are assumed. So like when you say Verizon doesn't have a bug bounty program, I mean, it's 2025. So, I mean, is it reasonable to expect that any kind of responsible reporter is going to come to you?
No.
So.
Yeah, there's history with that.
Okay. That was it.
Oh, Pete's getting up. Watch out.
And I'm going to take a middle road on that, because I think there's sort of different, there's different takes on this, right? Because I think that some companies also use a bug bounty program as too much of a catch-all, that they say like, oh, we have a bug bounty program, so it'll catch anything that needs to get caught, and they use it as a bit of a replacement for really comprehensive internal testing. And so I think I can sort of see it a bit both ways. But I think having like a good vulnerability disclosure program is very important, right? Which Verizon has. But I think if a company is taking the position of, we do extremely comprehensive internal testing, we have avenues for you to report things, we're just not necessarily going to incentivize it financially, I think that that's sort of up to the company to make that call.
Totally. To your question, so Verizon did have a bug bounty program before. I've only been there for 2 years. Prior to that, they went, I believe it was with HackerOne, and they spent like $2.5 million in 1 month because they didn't do appropriate testing before going to the bug bounty, right? So we've built a maturity model right now where we do authenticated pen testing against non-production through our team or our third party first. Then it gets added. We're using a company called Inspective. They've been pretty cool because they're allowing us to do this. So then they do pen tests as a service from a production black box perspective. Then they have private bug bounty. So any app that has gone through those two is currently in private bug bounty. And then we eventually will get to public bug bounty, but I don't want to do public bug bounty on any app that hasn't gone through the previous three, because then that's how you spend $2 million in a month. So that's the track we're going there. I totally agree, and I'm definitely pro that. I worked at SIG Group for 10 years. We built the public bug bounty there. I definitely agree. I mean, researchers should get paid. Like, if you spent time finding this vulnerability, you should get compensated for your time and not just a T-shirt that says Verizon.
Hi, Pete Eller. Why am I paying for SDLC? That's really the question you have to ask yourself.
Any thoughts in the crowd?
Oh, that's a statement. Now,
Yeah.
that's a rhetorical question. So, most who use a bug bounty who have thought through it are actually paying for you to do their pen testing on their specific areas they want you to focus on. They're also taking you away from where they don't want you to look. Wow. And I don't see bug bounty programs as, quote, a de facto standard. The U.S. government used it, and what they do, they were focusing on web applications. That's a consumer end user problem set, right? Not a vendor. So everyone should be doing SDLC. But I look at it like this. Isn't that information open? Especially if you're looking at open source. It's supposed to be open and transparent. So why are you hiding it? Why aren't you taking it to the community to address? Otherwise, you know, are you just a hacker for hire? Now, I get that might be your way of making money, but the reality is, as a systemic process, we're about raising everyone's boat. So we have an interchange. And if you look at most of us who have been around the industry for a while, we exchange data almost daily about problem sets to do that. There's no hacker bounty on that. There's no bug bounty on that. It's, hey, Omar, I have a problem I think affects you. You know, and that's reciprocal. So the question really is what's the focus of a bug bounty? Because it's not really CVD. You're paying for SDLC pen testing. And if you realize that's what you're looking at, then the question is, do you need help with your pen testing? And then do you regularize that? And to say it's a bug bounty because it's a CVE, I think is a misnomer.
I agree with parts of that. I think having run a few bug bounty programs before, I think it's a few things, right? I can't speak for other companies, but I think that things that we have put out of scope were less because there was a boogeyman there that we didn't want people to like let out of the box, and more because they're expensive. I mean, HackerOne, BugCrowd, whoever you use, it's not cheap. And so we put a lot of thought into prioritizing, if we're going to spend this money, where do we really want to get the most bang for our buck? And as far as the why, if you are a mature organization, which I think is super important, that you need to be a mature organization before you do this for lots of reasons. But if you typically are an organization that uses a decentralized model, might have 1 or 2 pen testers on a line of business unit, set of products, And those pen testers are really good. They tend to stick around for a while. And so they're, at least from my perspective, what I have seen is that those pen testers get very, very familiar with a product. They return great results, but you don't have the level of thought diversity that maybe a fresh set of eyes could give you on that product. And so where we've seen value for bug bounty programs is saying, you know, hey, our pen testers have done the assessment on this product. They might have done it a few times through a few different releases, but this is a really high priority product for us, right? I worked at Rockwell Automation, so our stuff kind of ran a bunch of really important things. And so we would look at what offers do we think are really critical to make sure that we get some thought diversity from pen testing on. And we would do those as sort of a limited scope and say, hey, like, we just really want a few really good researchers who have very high level expertise in these kinds of applications, platforms, products, et cetera, to take a few months and just hammer it, right? And, you know, do your worst, get back to us, tell us what you found. We're happy to compensate you for that time. And it provides a lot of value because there's things that, you know, I think one of the things that we learn through organizations like this is that, you know, you solve a problem different than I do. You solve a problem different than I do. And so getting some rotation on the bench in who's pen testing your product can really sort of be that next level up if you already have a mature program.
Essentially proactive security in depth. You do have your secure software development cycle. That's like minimum requirement. But even these apps that have gone through a full pen test, white box, then black box, et cetera, you put it in private bug bounty and they're still finding something. So it would be naive to think that your SSDLC is going to catch everything, because it's not. You're doing source code review, you're doing DAST, you're doing this, you're doing that. But someone's going to get there and they're going to find something. And if you don't have that mechanism for them to report it to you, then they might just go public with it or sell it to a threat actor or do something else. So I think, don't rely on it solely, right? I'm not saying, oh, only have bug bounty and don't do anything else, or only have CVD and don't do anything else. I just think it's part of like our defense in depth. It's proactive security in depth. Yeah, right.
Perfect. Do you have another challenge that you're facing?
Yeah. So I've worked for 2 big industrial OEMs. You know, we sold products globally. And I think a trend that we really struggled with was being companies that large portions of our security team were focused in the US. We primarily worked with CISA on doing CVD, right? You know, we all had our Vince portal and coordinated everything through that. And we got some feedback from folks internationally that were, you know, also very large customers of ours, that they felt like there was some favoritism, some America-centrism, and some lag in them getting the data because they were waiting for the CISA report to come out, right? So we would hear from them of, you know, why didn't you also coordinate this with Poland CERT, France CERT, BSI? You know, there's a whole host of them. And now like with CRA, there's a NISA reporting, and that it's going to be coming down the pipeline in 2026. Do you foresee functionality in a portal like Vince that there might be able to be like, we're 72 hours from disclosure, and maybe there is a functionality in Vince that we can do like a radio button of other certs to give them a chance to translate it before it goes out the door, and also to do coordination on it? Please tell me that you're about to say yes and my dream will come true.
So I won't be able to speak to that, Maggie, but I'm hearing that a challenge is, again, informing international partners, because if there, I believe there's a lot of organizations in this crowd who service international customers. And so how do we get them the information they need to inform their customers or take action on their side? Okay.
So as a vendor, I won't disclose that. I'll tell you why. I've done that before in classified spaces to only have it come back from, quote, one of their partners that went to then a commercial that came back. And this is a problem that the vendor community has had with CISA, its predecessor, NIPSI, and everyone who's run through there with Carnegie Mellon. So our trust level is zilch. That's a real problem set. Now, in Vince, you can actually do that kind of notification, but you have a problem in that it's controlled by CISA. And when we've asked, we've had problems about that coming through. And we've had a running discussion with CISA about having access to Vince in the code. Now they've thrown it out. But the problem that we're looking for from a community effort is how do we do that disclosure on a point-to-point instead of via the hub? If we could make Vince do that, then you would find our disclosure of going up, where I could go to, again, to Omar or to an open source project or another CNA, where they can actually be included. So we've had problems right now about bringing some of the open source stuff in there and getting people included who need to be there because they actually control the code, as to pose a lot of others included. So coordinated disclosure actually requires, do you have a need prior to public disclosure? And that's why I think the word disclosure is incorrect. Because disclosure is so broad that we have to talk about, is there a further notification for certain parties to protect large ecosystems? And then going to a national CISA doesn't guarantee that. That's part of the challenge, because, well, they classify it and they put it through all the channels of people who don't really need it, as opposed to those who really need it, but can't get to it now because it's classified. So you run into a host of problem sets. And I say that having spent time in the IC. Okay, so I get that.
Okay, so I'm hearing challenges of convening all the stakeholders as a part of coordinating.
Yeah, I don't think that a single central platform will solve that problem for us. I'm pretty much looking forward to Voltron as a protocol stack or as a decentralized protocol to do such things.
Can you tell us more about that?
So you should know about that since it's
Just
developed
for the audience.
It's developed at CERT-CC, looking into what would be a state machine of CVD, basically, and how do we communicate messages in that state machine? How can participants in that ecosystem know in which state everyone is? How do we agree on a disclosure date? As much as I like pre-disclosures and getting information beforehand, being able to prepare it, to review it, and giving feedback, since usually the questions I have, also your customers have. I don't care whether I get it pre-disclosed. I'm totally fine with getting the advisory on the advisory day, as long as it is machine readable in CSAF, since then it flows automatically in my system and I can evaluate that in a blink without having any media break in between. I have my analyst spot on there, and I don't need to go to a vendor website and try to figure out what's there. So yeah, I think machine readability is key if we want to get rid of the pre-disclosure and basically disclosing everything to everyone. Then just make it public. There's no point in pre-disclosure if the pre-disclosure group is bigger than the customer size. So this is my point on pre-disclosure. So really, we need to come back to CVD as a need-to-know principle. So not just because somebody could be involved, they're on the case. So if there is clear evidence that they have the vulnerability or that they are involved in a certain space, then yes, they have a right to be on the case. but it is not an automatic measure. Oh, they do something with IP. Let's include them on all network stack vulnerability. That doesn't make sense to me, and that might lead up to a stage where we miss a vendor or two on the case, but we're not over-reporting, and that should also help the caseload for the vendors.
No, I hear you. And I think part of the rub was because of the nature of events, we're always pre-disclosing to US-based, it used to be ICSCERT, RIP, CISA analysts, right? And so I think that there was some friction with international certs about if CISA gets to have analysts working pre-disclosure on this, why don't we, right? And I think exactly to your point, if I include one analyst from every cert globally, all of a sudden we aren't really working with a private CVD anymore. And I guess I would be curious to hear other folks' thoughts. Would a viable workaround for that be instead of trying to include every cert globally, can we get a mapping of these X number of vendors cover 90% of EDR, and maybe I don't actually give you the vulnerability, but I can give you the rule set so that you have rules in place prior to disclosure that have been pushed to the customer. And I might not have actually given you necessarily all of the breakdown of like the proof of concept of the vulnerability, but you have, snort rules or whatever you need to push out to the customers. And so we have pre-protection ahead of disclosure, because we all know, especially in critical infrastructure, the patching rate anyways, once I give you that actual disclosure.
These are lessons of the old beards, gray beards, okay? Once upon a time, when Ken and I were on the first board, we were in a place called the Canary Islands. We were there with TFC-CERT. TFC-CERT and FIRST both decided that we're going to compile that list. Ken, we ever compile that list? Yeah. That's when we only had 300 members of FIRST. Now they're at 770 something. Okay. The vast majority of FIRST is really CCERTs. So that's why 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we started doing the PCERT SIG and started doing the TCs, because we found that we need to know each other. So we do a lot of exchange now. We're mostly on Keybase. Why? Because that's where we went. And we're too stubborn to change. So when you look at somebody's name, it comes up as Pizza One. We know who that person is. That's where we exchange our data. So it's a lot less formal, but it's more regular. It's more trusted. And from there, we actually work things. So I'll give an example. We work DNS mask. Kind of important to a lot of people. We couldn't find the maintainer for 4 months. He decided to take a break. We had to coordinate. We actually wrote a patch. Red Hat wrote the patch. We were all like, oh God, we're ending up forking this code. We don't want to do this. And the guy shows up and says, what do you mean there's a problem? So we all helped him out. But that is how we work it through. And it was actually a global set of people working it. But you notice that while we were treating it very sensitive for the companies, and I'll just name two that were a part of it, Cisco and Google, along with Red Hat, but there was a lot more of us. I didn't say to Andrew or to Omar who they could tell inside the orgs. Okay, we treated just like a TLP red. It worked. So sometimes the formality of a system has so many is what's been then's and people have to be included, that it becomes unworkable. We also knew in that part that we had a lot of critical infrastructure to take care of. We didn't need a government to tell us that. They're called a customer. If the customers don't work, they complain. So once I went and spoke to the Financial Services ISAC and talked about the group called ICASI, which is now folded into the PCERT SIG. And we were all major vendors. And we said, well, we're going to exchange things. You know what the Financial Services ISAC leadership said to us? We thought that's what you already did. They assumed that. So a lot of people are making a deal out of we've got to make it formal when the assumption is already there and the work has been ongoing since the Barcelona first conference. That was what, 2006? Something like that. So we've been very formally doing that because we realize there's multiple tiers of who needs to be notified, and that waiting for someone else to kind of lead us there didn't work. We put a lot of good money into it. We've just expanded it without keeping the formal organization with collecting dues that some of us pay at $200,000 a year. So I think it's there. The challenge now is, and this is something in PCERT SIG that we've talked about actively, Derek Scholl, myself, and Josh Demling, we're getting a little gray. So we're working on the leadership to follow us, because folks like yourself are asking great questions and you need to hear, how do we solve that? That doesn't mean that's the answer. That means you have the experience and you can modify it. You can work with it. So I would encourage you to become a member of those kind of groups so that we can tell you, well, this is how we failed. There was a National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace that was put out by the Bush White House. And in there, we had a little problem being discussed before they invaded Iraq. It was a problem with send mail. To Verizon's comment, we had done a penetration test and then our researchers found another problem. We coordinated with the government, but we didn't tell the White House, and they said, well, you have to do it that way. It says, well, your strategy says no, So Howard Schmidt was threatening President Bush to call Tom Noonan, my CEO at the time. We did it because we need to do it. And it was the major affected vendors allowing us, the researchers, to coordinate with people to make sure we didn't kill critical infrastructure at a very important time for a lot of people who had lives on the line. So realize, I think that a lot of times look at vendors as, well, they're just cashing in on customers. No, we actually understand it as a fiduciary duty. That's a big statement to say. So I welcome you to that community, because Omar's got guys, I've got guys, Microsoft's got folks, Verizon's got folks, all of us do, and they know each other. And you just need to be part of that community. It doesn't mean we don't use Vince. We do, but we understand its limitations to some of our coordinations. So you use the right tool at the appropriate time. And you just need to learn about some of those other tools. Sorry for that. I don't mean to be preachy.
No, Pete, that's super great. And I know we surveyed the room and there's people in here who have been doing CVD for 15, 20 plus years. And so I recommend that we all get to know you all and, seek that guidance and that advice. And I'm so glad that everyone's here in this room today to build those relationships, because it's a very small community, the vulnerability community. And so I think just being in this room, seeing each other's faces, connecting afterwards, having these types of kind of informal conversations is really crucial towards, again, securing systems, securing our customers, securing the nation. I know, Thomas, you had a comment?
And now something totally different.
Take it away.
Yeah, so what I want to tackle on is the coordinator role. From my perspective, a coordinator should only be there if there is really a need for the coordinator. There are so many cases out there where you have an unexperienced researcher or you have an unexperienced company that really need that guidance.
Sure.
And that need your time. And so we have done cases where we say, let's do it in a way that we train the people on their first case, that hopefully they can run their second case on their own. That uses a lot of resources to get the first one right and to tell them what to do and how to do it and what's the next step, when do we meet again, and discuss the results of the last week or whatever. But it has been quite successful, so that after a while I got a call and they said, yeah, we had our cases set up, our program stood up after the first case we run with you, and now we have a special case, we don't really know what to do. Could we come back to you? And I say, yeah, sure. There was some researcher that wanted to get money for before disclosing the vulnerability, and so yeah, that was an interesting case at the end. But what I think is, if you are a mature PCERT, then you don't need a coordinator. If the researcher wants a coordinator, okay, up to the researcher. We're not, if somebody wants us to be in the case, we join the case, but if it's not necessarily, then we try to talk to them and say, hey, it's a mature PCERT, you can work with them, and if something goes wrong, you can always come back to us. And we know them, and I can pick up the phone and say, hey, what's happening in this case? I got a complaint or whatever. For me, the coordinator role is to bring PCERTs up to speed, or to bring companies up to speed so that they have PCERTs. It's not the everyday vulnerability coordination, but it's the first run in the vulnerability coordination. And then there is also the small part of the multi-party coordination, where if you don't have the capacity to do it on your own, then feel free to reach out to a coordinator. And even we as coordinators, if I think about Amnesia 33, we might even get together and split it up geographically or whatever, to help ourselves lower the caseload and improve the quality for each individual company.
And then Thomas, I know probably a lot of people know you in this room, and I know where you're from, but can you tell everyone which national cert you're with?
So I'm with CERT Bund at BSI Germany.
Thank you. Julia's got a comment over there in the corner. Julia is my amazing colleague at CISA. She's our lead CNA recruiter, and she talks with CNAs every single day.
Yeah, thank you, Rita. You are also my amazing colleague.
Thank you.
Tomo, you're an amazing peer. So thanks for all your work in leading this. I wanted to add that the roots in the CVE program serve as that coordinator mentor a lot of times. I know at CISA we do. I know talking with JPCERT and, sorry, Christian, pointing you out, in CBay right here. We take that role as bringing PCERTs up to speed very seriously. It's part of our CNA recruitment strategy. Is that organizational maturity. And so some CNAs come to us and they're like, yep, we have our vulnerability disclosure policy. We have our public advisories ready to go. All we need is just to be a numbering authority and to let us keep going and disclosing vulnerabilities. Other organizations, CISA has served as the third-party coordinator in a case, and we've said, hey, you did really good on this first case. Why don't you become a CNA, and so you can assign the CVE in the future on your own? And so kind of to your point that coordinator should be there when there is an inexperienced organization. The roots help do that. And I know at CISA, we also kind of cultivate that knowledge of CVD. And I know that's part of the CVD coordinated or community of practice that Tomo is helping lead.
No, completely, Julian. I know you've done such tremendous work as the lead CNA recruiter, and a lot of the leads that we do and did get were from our coordinated vulnerability disclosure work, and we saw entities that were doing a great job, and we're like, hey, you guys should be a numbering authority and contribute to the ecosystem.
One quick comment,
Mhm.
actually, I think that, I mean, this is a very complex problem that we have tried to solve for many years. And we're in the bad news business too, so it doesn't help. So the first thing is actually, even though it's not perfect, thank you. This is a really bad, shitty job, right? Trying to keep a Rolodex on who to actually, please somewhere around the world. Second one is, how some companies actually is really easy to find who to contact. Other ones, don't assist. The other ones get acquired. They change the names. I mean, it's significant, right? So first of all, thank you. Second, thank you for contributing to standards, and specifically to Thomas. I'm going to put him on the spot in there. And what I want to actually drive is we cannot solve the problem the way that we're dealing right now with this. We have to think about, a lot of things already exist. How can I find if a vendor actually has a piece or team on who to contact? Again, I mentioned security.text. I'm not going to, repeat that in there. And then the second one is I'm always saying if I'm disclosing vulnerabilities or even communicating to a human, I'm already failing. We need to think about, this is in a scale that is going to get a lot worse. So we have to think about the methodology of, trust in systems that can exchange this information that is fast, that then a CERT or a customer or a coordinator and so on, can act upon it. What Pete was mentioning is spot on in some things, and actually what Thomas mentioned after that. In some cases, you don't need the coordination. It's only two vendors that probably may be affected. But the challenge in some cases is that even if you're doing that type of coordination, always think, does this vulnerability affect somebody else? Can it affect, and I'm not talking about just open source that of course is going to affect somebody else, but does this vulnerability has a repercussion of, a specific vendor? It's really hard to actually determine that. If you don't know, then that's whenever you can seek guidance from the coordinators because they're seeing this on a daily basis. So, but thank you.
I think we had a comment over there in the back. And for those of you who don't know Omar, he's with Cisco and he's amazing. In the spirit of just introducing everybody and knowing who all the folks are.
Yeah, thanks. Ken Van Wyck here.
Hi, Ken.
Formerly of
Someone's
CERT.
bowing down behind you.
No. So my message is simple. Let's, first of all, it's amazing how far we've come. And let's also keep in mind where we were. 1989, when the Carnegie Mellon CERT was first set up, we were chartered to be what we would now call a CCERT. We were there to help sites when they got hit, and we'd provide them with technical guidance and whatnot. But very quickly, we started running into software vulnerabilities and how do we handle these things. And I can tell you from personal experience that that first year of CERT operations, we contacted dozens of software vendors, and frequently we were threatened with lawsuits, in some cases personally. If you publish this, we will sue you personally. And so think about where we've been. First off, it's amazing how much more open the software community is now to people telling them, hey, I discovered a vulnerability in your code. Now it's accepted, and great, talk to our bounty or bug bounty people and let's go, whatever. But the litmus test that we always applied at CERT in the early days when we would have a software vulnerability, even in cases where we were being threatened by the software developer with lawsuits, again, personally sometimes, the litmus test was, does publishing this advisory make the problem bigger or smaller? Simple as that, right? Is there a patch available? Is the patch working? Can the people readily get to that patch? These are in the days where sometimes patches were distributed on CD-ROM, you know, not kidding. So does publishing this advisory make the problem bigger or smaller? And we would have sometimes fierce debates internally before we would put out an advisory. But at the end of the day, we came to a consensus and we all agreed, yep, publishing this advisory was the right thing to do. And sometimes those advisories went out under threat of lawsuit, and it was still worth doing. So that's all I wanted to say. But thank you. It's amazing how far this community has come, and we should applaud that.
Well, let's applaud that then.
The problem is they still, when people are new to disclosures, being disclosed upon, if you will, their knee-jerk reaction is sue. Okay. And you heard that in the auto industry a couple of years ago when Chris and friends went ahead and stopped the Jeep on the highway. And that is usually an initial reaction for those who are not aware. And then it takes a while for them to kind of get with understanding. I didn't say with the program, they need a degree of understanding at a corporate level of what that means. So I would say to any organization, and by the way, Ken is exactly on point with his comments. So there is a problem. It's called software and humans. Okay. And for most people, the problem is the big vendors or open source community says they don't do a great job or they do poorly. You pick your adjective. The issue is they actually also produce software because they either have an app or a website and they do data in the back end, some still in spreadsheets and Google Sheets, whatever, but they're doing something. And as soon as they start writing code, they now are part of the problem. So people haven't extended that far down to think about how do they take on their problem sets. Then we have this, we need to rev to the latest version, which is actually a very poor choice because it's code that hasn't been really tested. And now you're going to put all your cookies into this new code with no idea what's there. So you have to think through what is that, because having something, say all vulnerabilities fixed, I'll use that famous moniker from customers, consumers, is everything has to be fixed. And it's like, yeah, are you ready to do all your changes? Because the risk that you're introducing to your organization is actually 2 or 3 times more. So the point of the conversation there is we need to fix risk of appropriate items. And that's part of what we do as part of CVD, is how risky is this as to how many people we have to do. In other words, inform prior to going out.
Mhm.
So we need to think through that. And then when I look at people who need a CVE, they don't need to be a CNA. Sorry, it's just not right. As a CVE board member, I push back against that. That's extremely poor. Because if they're only issuing one CVE every 3 years, I would say they're not a CNA. They can get CVEs very easily from the program. And when we talk as roots, we need to talk about our scope. I'm a root. I know where my scope is. It's not over in ICS. As a CNA LR, the only non-government CNA LR, we are not balanced in the program because this is a global problem and it needs, by those of us who produce software, to stand up. We have to be there. You just can't wait for some other guy to do it. It's our problem. We need to own it. That's why we created CVRF, that's now CSAF. It's why we created CVSS. It's why they created CVE. All these things were created because we had a need. But it shouldn't be government explaining that need, because we have now disconnected where we have EOX, EOL, EOS, and every C something or other going on. And we don't know how to map it and run it, so we scare potential participants in solving these issues. And I'm really harping on this because we can't just recruit CNAs and say, well, they know how to do some CVD. I can tell you, I know a CNA that was minted last year who understood nothing about CVD and killed the processes. And I know that because I spoke with that CNA a lot. I now meet with them monthly, along with a whole lot of other open source software CNAs, because there's a difference in our approach and we haven't figured out what that is yet. We need to do a better job of quality, so when we provide information, it's accepted and actioned. To your point, you can issue a patch. I just had a customer come to me and said, my scanner said, and this is a huge problem. I said, that was fixed in 2021. You need to apply it. I don't call it a critical for nothing. I don't fix it quickly for nothing. It's a risk. Where did that communication break down? That's our problem. That's what we should be talking to, because the customer is not focused entirely on the risk. They're focused on the check mark. And we've confused them with too many things that don't make sense to them. I had somebody say something to me yesterday, which was telling. He's a scanning vendor. He says, you didn't enable me to talk to the customer about how you do this. And I went, oh, damn. Did I really tell the customer? Think about that. I bet you we all have something to do there. And that's where we should be focusing our efforts, because if we set it in a rather consistent manner, collectively, we're going to change behaviors, which in the end is really what we're after. We're not going to impress them with 10,000 CNAs. We are going to impress them with several CNA stories of why that's important. Notice I didn't say one. I'm not foolish. But we have to have themes about what it is that protects them to a large extent. In virtual security, you're not going to get there. And finally, Omar's point, I had a boss, I was at Honeywell, said, Peter, the only time I ever see you is bad news, so what is it this time? And I thought, oh my gosh, she's right. So 2 weeks later, I just went over and said, hey, Q, hi. She says, what is it? I said, I just came by to say hi with no bad news for a change. So in the CTO I reported to said, I grade your performance on how many complaints I hear. In other words, the more complaints, the more I was doing my job. And I thought, that's a negative way to think of us. Think about that. How do you make yourself positive so when you come in, they really, while you're giving bad news, see that you're doing the right thing?
Thanks for that, Pete. I think we're nearly at the end of the time, but I'm going to leave it you, sir. And I'd love to know your name and where you're from.
So my name is Brian Ford.
Hi, Brian.
And I actually am an old colleague of Omar and Jerry and Dario at Cisco. But I'm here for kind of a different reason. I didn't raise my hand at all when you were asking who was doing what, because I guess my current role is I'm a technical educator, right? And so I was supposed to be here representing CompTIA. CompTIA, long story, got bought by a tech and Thomas Bravo venture capital firm. So, but just to kind of hit some points here, I think one of the things that's missing so currently in our curriculum, and I'm also a tech educator, I teach at the college level, cybersecurity. Everybody gets CVEs. CVE guys, you're doing an awesome job. Everybody gets CVEs.
CVE guys.
Everybody gets, NVD. All
Speaking
right.
of which, Chris Coffin just pops his face into the door as soon as
So,
he said that.
NVD, it's rocking. Everybody does, sees that. Everybody sees CVSS. All right. Literally, we do in pretty much any program, you basically, NVD, CVEs, how you triage them, CVSS. I think one of the things that's missing, and you kind of hit on it, is when we talk about disclosure, we tend to go back, and I always demo the Cisco security site. I always demo the Microsoft Security Research Center. I always look at CISA. I always basically demo the KEV catalog. Thank you, God. Actually, the KEV catalog, unfortunately, didn't make it into our exam objectives, but it's a phenomenal tool. But I think the greater thing that's missing, and I want to get with the CNA coordinators, is we don't do enough talking about everybody else. We do talk about JPCERT. I only because of a tool you used a couple of years ago, and you did some phenomenal reporting on it. Literally that changed the platform. We basically all started looking at your work, but we don't look at enough CNAs, and that doesn't get in. And I think that's what I'm taking away is that's all about teaching the next generation about responsible disclosure, and I think that's what's missing. Right. My comments earlier about bug bounty programs, it's 2025 bug bounty programs, because I've been there. I've coached student teams that basically go and do these, participate in these bug bounty programs. The students' expectation is that that's normal. You mean I have responsible disclosure without a bounty? They kind of like, and I'm, no, that's what we did for years and years before, right? So that's just my take on the whole thing. I just tremendously, sitting here, I just soaked up a whole lot in terms of this. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there in terms of, I think, areas where you're hitting really strong and areas where we need to do more work. Thank you.
Those are super great points. We'd love to connect with you from the teaching perspective on, our efforts to upskill current CNAs and just how we recruit quality ones. So that's super great. And we'd love a good certification on all of this stuff. I've got the Security Plus, but I don't think there's one that's like super akin to this line of work.
Yeah, I just want to say that all the information was insightful. I'll bring back to my group and definitely use the information. And from quality of everything to coordinators to information being not reached to the people who need to know, or people who need to engage not being engaged. I would frame it as lack of coordination in every part of the ecosystem. So if anyone has thoughts on any even tiny bit to overcome all the problems, I'll be at the conference. Please come to me and let's have conversation. Thank you so much.
Yep. So I think with that, we're at time, correct? Okay. I appreciate everyone being in here. I expect that everyone's going to get everybody's contact informations, and the more senior people of this line of work are going to help mentor us newer folk. And we're just going to continue to collaborate and do awesome things. Thanks.